Larry Williams. I'm the President and CEO of TAG, and so just want to welcome you all here and thank you for joining us this morning. We're really excited to have Stacie here today to talk about workforce trends and interview tips. Very relevant given the environment of employment that we're working in today. I want to tell you a little bit about Stacie's background and why she's such a great person to lead this discussion today. Stacie is a former HR leader and operations executive, serving most recently as the Chief People Officer for SecureWorks. Prior to joining SecureWorks in 2015, Stacie was the EVP for Customer Operations of Earthlink from 2007 to 2013, and she served as Earthlink's Chief People Officer, a brand we have seen come back to Atlanta skyline. In addition, she served in a variety of human resources roles for Earthlink from 2002 until 2007. Excuse me. Stacie was co-founder and president of Center Change International in 93 to 92. She co-authored a book on eliminating organizational barriers to high performance entitled The Chicken Conspiracy: Breaking the Cycle of Personal Stress and Organizational Mediocrity. You might want to think about republishing that these days. Stacie, it's a very appropriate title. She has served as past president and board member of the Human Resources Leadership Forum. She is a graduate of Yale University, and she's the former chair of the Technology Association of Georgia and continues to sit on our executive committee. And Stacie, we thank you for your leadership, and we thank you for talking with us this morning. Stacie, you're a great resource for everyone and how to master your interviews. And so with that, I'd like to turn it over for our executive insights with Stacie Hagan.
Well, thanks, Larry. That's a very kind introduction. Everybody can hear me okay, I guess.
You are
good. I'm happy to be here. This is an interesting topic, and as you said, Larry, timely, because so many people are finding themselves unexpectedly in a job search right now. And a lot of us really don't like interviews, and we don't practice them very often. We feel very rusty. And so maybe taking a pause in the day and talking about what works, what doesn't work is useful. I will say, I'm not going to claim I've mastered this either. I think interviewing and landing that job is more of an art than a science. And there's a whole lot of, it depends based on the type of job you're searching for, the type of companies that you're interviewing with, and all those circumstances. But we'll try to touch on some of those things. I understand that there have been a couple of previous sessions, and one of them I watched the recording, on networking and on making sure you've really developed your personal brand, which are great preliminary steps to what we're going to talk about today. Today, I'd like to talk a little bit about resumes, touch briefly on that, and then also on the interview process and navigating that hiring process. So I will share my screen here. And Larry, I can see you. If you give me a thumbs up, if you can see the screen. Good. Thanks for the background on me. Yes, I'm a former Chief People Officer. I have just recently retired from SecureWorks a few weeks ago. So this whole retirement thing is kind of new to me. We'll see how that goes. I'm glad to be involved with organizations like TAG, where I can really stay engaged and contribute, hopefully, to add value for other folks. As I said, I wouldn't claim to be the expert on interviews. And one of the things I did to prepare for this morning was to reach out to some of my recruiting team back at SecureWorks and other great recruiters I've known over time. And I have to give them a lot of credit. And I'm going to do a shout out in particular for one of the strongest technical recruiters we've ever had at SecureWorks, John Arnold. And we were able to talk a lot about what he sees happening for those very sophisticated tech roles, software developers, et cetera, a lot of cloud expertise, because that's where he spends his time. What I want to share today is some highlights and some sort of lessons based on some best practices we've seen, but some mistakes we've seen as well. I've spent a lot of my time in recent years interviewing executives, and when I was at Earthlink, also directors for the board. And so I'm rounding out my experience with those from my talent acquisition team to share a little bit more. I want to cover really these categories today. First of all, I'll call it the 3 R's: resume, research, and rehearsing. 3 steps that people often skip or skim across too quickly that I believe is a big mistake. Then I want to spend some time talking about the navigating the hiring process overall, how it works, how to know where you are, how to prep for those questions that maybe you fear most or you're most concerned may come up. My goal is to hopefully give people some practical takeaways when I come to things like this. I want a few really practical to-dos. So hopefully everyone here will walk away with a few of those that are maybe new and different, a little different twist. And I would say that if I say something as we go along that it doesn't make sense or seems disconnected, call me out and ask a question. But I will focus on sort of walking through the material and then spending a lot of time with discussion at the end, because I think towards the end, when we get into some of these questions that typically come up in interviews, there's probably going to be a lot of good discussion there. So with that, we'll jump in, starting off with the resume, research, and need to rehearse. First, we need a little bit of a reality check about resumes. The industry average at this point is an initial resume review lasts approximately 8 seconds. So if you think about the companies that are increasingly investing in artificial intelligence to determine whether or not your resume lists the required skills and it's worth a screen, or the companies that don't have the investment in AI, but they have recruiters who are slammed with lots of positions to fill and way too many resumes to review. 8 seconds is pretty common. And that can be sort of daunting and think, wow, I hate, most people hate writing their own resume. They feel like they can't do it. They don't like trying to sell themselves. And it's a struggle. And when you think, wow, it may only get 8 seconds before I'm in the door, why should I even bother? And that sort of reminds me of a quote by Winston Churchill when he said, if I had more time, I would have written you a shorter letter. I don't know if you've heard that line before, but we do need to invest the time because you can't typically get in the door without a resume. It is very rare to land a job without a resume. It does happen sometimes with just referrals, but typically you need that as your calling card, and you need to get it right, because it's interestingly not just about you and showcasing your great talents. It's about whether it matches what the reviewer is looking for in the job that they're trying to fill. That's where that artificial intelligence comes in. That's where that 8-second scan comes in, because it's a quick, do I see what I need for this role? There was a recent scenario in one of the highly sophisticated technical hires at SecureWorks, where a candidate was ruled out very early on in the process. Didn't get past the initial screening conversation, which I'll talk about that. The reason why they didn't is because they only had 1 out of the 4 absolutely required essential qualifications. And that candidate came back later and said, I don't understand why I'm not moving forward. I have all this. Well, interestingly, they didn't make that point. They didn't make the connections. It wasn't clearly on their resume, and they didn't demonstrate in the conversation how their skills matched. So the recruiter had to move on. So getting that match right is critical, which also means you probably can't just have one resume. One version of your resume won't work. If you have any college applicants that you know in your family or friends, you know that it's not possible to write one college application and one set of essay questions anymore. Every college has their own spin and their own unique version of what they're looking for, which means you've got to do customization. And you should think about it that way for job applications as well. Again, it's not how great the resume makes you look. I mean, obviously that's part of it, but it's how well it matches to the qualifications that the recruiter is and the hiring manager are looking for. You know, to the point about people don't like to write their resumes, I really encourage people to do their own resume first. You can't entirely outsource this exercise to somebody else. And I know there are great professionals who do this, but you're the one who knows your work better than anyone. The technical terms, the type of deliverables, the results that you achieved. So do your own work first, but then get some really strong reviews. I would say a minimum of 3. I'd go for 5 or 6. I'd look for people with different perspectives, but most of all, who will be brutally honest with you. I remember when I first got out of college and I had this new shiny bachelor's degree from a great school, and I was out there looking for my first job, and I had a relative who was senior level in business look at my resume for me, and he came back and said, "So you want to be an executive assistant?" And I was like, "Well, no. I mean, I could do that, but that's not exactly what I'm looking for. I really want to be able to apply my degree." He goes, "Your resume comes across as if, you know, you have these technical skills, these organizational skills, these writing skills. It comes across that you're looking for an EA role. If that's not what you're looking for, you need to change your resume." And I needed that sort of honest feedback. Also, there's some great tools out there that you can use. Jobscan.com is one. There's a LinkedIn job scoring tool. Use those to compare what you have in your resume to that job description to see how much of a link, a matchup there is, and make tweaks before you submit it to the company that you're hoping to get the attention of. I want to share with you, before we leave the resume topic, just a few do's and don'ts. Now, I will preface this with, this is my advice. Other people may have slightly different advice. That's why I say this is more of an art than it is a science, but this is based on my experience. A few do's that I would recommend. Keep your resume simple. It needs to be easy to skim for those key points. Remember, 8 seconds. We need to quickly see the key takeaways, and obviously research how to use those key words that will come up in those scans and with those AI tools and help match up to what the job requirements are. Use bullets, not big, long paragraphs and sentences, but lots of short, brief bullets that summarize your accomplishments, and be as specific as you can. You know, lines of code you've written, operating cost savings, sales achievements, whatever it happens to be, put those achievements in terms of outcomes. And remember that you don't have to tell everything. You're summarizing those results so that it will invite inquiry. I love a resume that gives me those results and I'm like, man, I wonder how they achieved that. I would like to understand more about what this individual did to achieve those kind of results so quickly or over time in their career. So that will lead me to set up my interview questions when I meet with the candidate. Don't forget to list sample work. You know, a lot of us today, especially in technology, have examples of our work, maybe a design portfolio, some code repositories that you can reference and direct the interviewer to see more examples of what you do. These are key pieces that can help expand on your resume. Some don'ts I would offer. I'm a big believer. Your resume should not be longer than 2 pages unless, of course, you're in a field where it's expected that you have this very long CV with all your publications and everything else. I have hired CEOs, CFOs, COOs, every C-level job, and members of boards of directors who have held those roles over and over and over again with not more than a 2-page resume. So keep it short, keep it simple. You're drowning the reader if you try to do much more than that. And frankly, you're not creating the intrigue that invites the interview. Don't list your tasks and responsibilities. Always list outcomes. And that's a struggle for a lot of people, especially people that are earlier in their career. And they feel like, well, I was a part of a team and I didn't do it by myself. But that's okay. You can think back, if these are the things I did, what were we trying to achieve and how did we measure whether we achieved that? And then talk about your results that way. I encourage people, don't add skills, certifications, almost completed degrees, because unfortunately it illustrates that I don't finish things. That's at least the impression it often leaves with the reviewer, and that's just not worth it. You can talk about that. You can talk about what you did with your education and how far you took it and why you stopped, but don't lead with it on your resume. Also, don't bother with complex graphics or tables. Now, of course, there are some jobs that is part of the job, and so you want to illustrate your capability, which is probably better done through, again, links to your work samples. But what happens is when you apply to a job at a company, you go online into their, basically a portal of their applicant tracking system, and it typically strips all that out, and it jumbles it up and makes it very difficult for the recruiter to get through. So it's typically doesn't help you to have a lot of formatting, complicated formatting or design components. I want to switch gears from the resume and talk about research. I have to say that even in interviewing executives, this is the most common mistake that I saw at senior levels of leadership, where they just didn't research the company that they're talking to enough. And it happens, of course, at all levels of job seekers. You know, with very, very busy executives who are already in leadership roles, it's this capacity issue, right? But it's true for everybody. I don't have time to do all this research, so I'm just going to go in and see what I can learn during the interview process. It basically it suggests that you're not interested enough to do your homework. And it's important to take this step in advance, including for that initial recruiter screen. I'm going to talk a little bit about the process in a minute, but that initial screen is not a throwaway. That recruiter is going to present a slate of 3 to 5 of their best candidates. So don't get ruled out early on. Things to research. No matter what level of job you're going after, start with the business itself. Understand the products and services. Understand their performance track record if you can. If it's a public company, absolutely go listen to the last earnings release or analyst meeting recording, or read their press releases. If it's not a public company, then look at other awards and recognition they have received, news articles about them, etc. Think about and understand who their competitors are. Is this a new company? Is this a company with a long history? Really get briefed on all of that. And when you do, look at what makes you curious and what questions do you have that you would like to ask later, and jot those down because you will need them in later stages of the interview process. Look at the company's reputation. Again, awards and recognition as a workplace, as an employer. As a former head of HR, can't believe I'm telling people to go look at Glassdoor, but go look at Glassdoor. It's part of the reality that we're in today. Do it with appropriate perspective, that people tend to go there because they sometimes have an axe to grind, and companies are doing a better and better job of encouraging people to go out and write reviews that are more likely to be positive. So companies are also managing their presence there. But it gives you a perspective. It's a data point. And also, you may know someone at the company who's willing to share their work experience and tell you a little bit about what it's like to be there. Research the people that you're going to be interviewing with. Who are they? What's their current role? What have they done before? This is just so easy now with almost everyone having a LinkedIn profile. There's no point in skipping this step. And they may have connections with other people in your network too, and those could be easy conversation starters for the interview. Seems really obvious and gets skipped all the time. Research the job. Read that position description thoroughly, and don't just gloss over it. Look at what did they highlight and why? What did they seem to prioritize? Because this tells you something about what they're going to be looking for, both in your resume and during the interview process. And it's interesting, sometimes if you get in there and find out, oh, well, that was just an old job description that we posted out there and it doesn't really mean anything. Okay, now it's shown that you did your homework, and it gives you the opportunity to find out what really matters and tailor your interview responses to make sure you demonstrate that match. And that's my final point. Again, you've done lots of great things. You have great skills and experience to share, but it only matters if it matches the job requirements that they're trying to fill. And that's why this research helps you tailor your story to emphasize the components that will matter most to this employer. Practice. I want to touch a little bit on the importance of rehearsing, and I think this has become more and more important all the time as we've moved into more video interviewing. Adults don't like to practice, but it's a big mistake not to do it. And video is really hard, so I want to talk about video in particular, but whether it's an in-person or a video interview, the whole thing is about the content you share and the confidence with which you share it. So your body language, your voice, your eye contact, even when you're on video, matters. And you are leaving an impression that's either going to keep you at the top of that list and a part of that slate that moves forward, or drops you to the bottom. Keep in mind, every question you answer, the goal is to illustrate how you are a good match for this job. Now, I recognize interviews make people nervous, so you need to plan to do a few things to manage your nerves. Number one, practice. Get people that you know who will give you honest feedback, and do role plays. Practice how you're going to answer those questions. Practice that video interview. Get the feedback on how you're coming across and where you can sharpen your skills. I also like to encourage people to do what you need to build your confidence. There's a neat TED Talk out there by Amy Cuddy on power poses. It's another form of mindfulness, effectively. What you do right before that interview to get yourself centered and focused to present as best as possible. And because video interviews are so much the norm these days, and frankly, right now, may be the only path you get to the offer. There's a few tips I'd like to share that are frankly based on a lot of mistakes that I've seen. Seems obvious, but know the software. Sometimes it's software like this, like Zoom or Teams, something you've used before, but sometimes it's software that is unique to a platform that the company is using for their video-based interviews. Download it, set up your personal account, test it, and if you can, practice it with someone. Sometimes you can't if there's a certain, if it's the company's software that you're logging into. If you are going to need to screen share during your interview, know how to do it. Try it first. Close everything else on your laptop. Seems obvious. You wouldn't believe how often people forget that. And find the mute button. You will need the mute button at some point, I promise you. So make sure you know how to use the software. Also set the stage. Now, a lot of this is true for people just in video conferences all the time right now with the coronavirus and so much working remote. Some good practices are get your laptop or your computer to eye level so that you're not looking down. Make sure that the camera on the screen is the one that you're going to be looking at. I can't tell you how many times people, especially highly technical people with multiple monitors, will be looking at one screen while the camera is looking at the side of their head. And again, back to content and competence, it misses the point. So that's a basic. Obviously, you need to have good connectivity so you don't have technical problems. Limit your background noise and your distractions, and make sure your background is reasonably appropriate. Now, it's okay to have some conversation starter in the background that's interesting, but don't overdo it. We don't want the interview to wander off into everything behind you and leave the focus on you and the job. Be early and be prepared. A lot of people struggle with, how do I dress for professionally for an interview when it's on video, and maybe I'm even applying for what will always be a remote job. And if that's the case, just remember, you want to look professional, appropriate for the company and their expectations, and appropriate so for a home interview, but be comfortable. Another key thing is having notes is fine. Glancing at your notes is fine. I've known people who tape their notes around the screen so that they can keep that eye contact on the screen, but don't decide to Google the answer to something in the middle of an interview. Again, I'm telling you this because it's happened many times and interviewers can tell. Also, I one point above that I didn't mention, have a good room temperature. Why would I say that? You don't need to add anything that causes you to sweat bullets while you're on the video conference doing your interview. So if you can control it, you should control it. So hopefully that's helpful to think about. Don't just go from networking to what am I going to do in this interview? Don't forget the 3 R's in the middle. You've got to have a strong resume that gets you in the door. You have to do your research to prepare and tailor your comments, and you need to rehearse. So now you're in the process. How do you know where you are, and how do you prep for some of those tough questions? First, I want to share with you an illustration of a hiring process I recently heard about, and this is in Silicon Valley, and we're seeing these kinds of practices increasingly all over the place. This is an actual process. First, there was a recruiter screen that was followed then by a hiring manager interview, if you made it, which was then led to a simulation where you needed to do a bunch of work, sometimes a day and a half worth of work, prepping for a simulation that then gets reviewed. Your work results are reviewed by a selection team, often a panel type of interview. And lo and behold, that just led to a case study where you get to do even more analysis and presentation of your findings, results, and recommendations on real company problems. Again, for a company you're interviewing with, so you don't even know them that well. That then led to a leader panel where more senior leaders in the company then interviewed the individual, then back to the hiring manager, which then led to reference checks and ultimately to the offer. That's a complex, lengthy process and frankly, very time-consuming. Not every hiring process works like that. Some have even more steps, believe it or not. Some have fewer, but knowing where you are and what the process is critical, because again, your goal is to make it to the next step. Every single meeting that you have is about making it to the next step. So to figure out where you are, try to listen for what are they trying to assess right now at this phase. Somewhere in this process, the hiring team will be assessing for your qualifications compared to the job requirements, your technical fit. Do you have that expertise and functional skill sets? Your cultural fit, what your motivations are for wanting to join this company, leave the company that you're in, change your career, whatever it is you're doing, and your interest level in the company that you're interviewing with. Knowing where you are in the process helps you know how to advance to the next stage. You can always ask the recruiter, the lead recruiter, to help describe how this process will unfold, what steps that you can expect, and what's most important at each phase so that you can win one step at a time. And it's also legitimate to get feedback along the way. Now, if you're going to ask for that feedback, especially from the recruiter or directly the hiring manager or anyone you're speaking with, recognize that it can take time. They may be running a lot of candidates through the process, and they may not get back to you as fast as you like, but more often than not, they will come back to you with some information. If you don't make it to the next step, it's very legitimate to say, can you help me understand what I could have done differently or how I might improve with this process in the future? And just listen. Don't defend. If you defend, you probably will not have another interview with that company. But listen and learn how you can improve for the next time. Some things that I have seen derail people are things like going off on tangents, talking way too long and oversharing on a topic, and then not even answering the question that was put out there to begin with. And if you lose track, you can come back and say, let me step back and make sure I'm clear what's most important to you and how I answer this question. When people are unable to clearly explain experiences or processes that they actually talk about on their resume, that disconnect is deadly and will cause you to lose your place in the process and potentially fall out. And again, as I've said before, failing to make the connection between not just all the great things you've done, but how they matter to this job that this employer is trying to fill and why it's relevant. That is key. So staying on track, some tips to make sure you don't have one of those derailers happen to you. Obviously, active listening. Most interviewers will drop hints here and there or lead into their questions, giving you a little clue of actually what they're looking for. So listen for that. And when you've answered a question, if you need to check and say, did I hit the key points that you were looking for, or is there something else I could further expand upon that would help you understand my response? You'll occasionally get that poker face interviewer who will not give you any clues or feedback, but that isn't typically the norm. More often than not, people are trying to make sure that you're having a positive impression of the company also while you're having this interviewing process. And so they tend to use their interpersonal skills a little bit more effectively than that. So let's talk about some of the types of questions that come up, and I'm going to hit on some here, and then I'd love to open all of this up to broader discussion. Interview questions typically can fall in a variety of buckets, and if you think about those buckets and how you prepare for each one, it'll help you feel more confident going into the interview. So first of all, traditional questions. These are the ones, tell me a little bit about yourself. What's your biggest weakness? Why are you leaving your current company? All of these kinds of things are pretty traditional, fact-finding, laying the groundwork kinds of questions. Now, the one, tell me a little bit about yourself, or give me an overview of your career. That, and I will tell you this happens with senior leaders all the time, can turn into a 20-minute monologue, even a 30-minute, 40-minute monologue. Mistake, big mistake. Sometimes people ask this question when they haven't read your resume well enough and they need you to kind of get them warmed up. Shame on them, but it happens. But make it quick. This is your elevator pitch about yourself. You want to just give a high-level overview and then allow the interviewer to take it deeper where they have interest. So a good rule to follow is present, past, future. Tell them a little bit about where you are today, what's important to you, how that's grounded in where you've come from, some of the key things you've learned and what you've achieved, and how you want to apply that knowledge going forward in the future, and remember to link it to the job that you're talking about. The biggest weakness, what's your biggest weakness, is a classic question. Again, not having one, I can't think of any. I'm too awesome. These are not good ways to go. This is about how self-aware is this person and how willing are they to be transparent. So think about WAR, W-A-R. What is the weakness? What have I done to strengthen in that area and improve myself And what are the kinds of results I've seen as I've worked on that in my career? Those are key ways to show learning and growth and focus and just, frankly, positive self-awareness. If the reason that you're leaving or have left your employer is that you have been laid off, it's okay to say that. It's okay to say, you know, unfortunately, there were economic pressures on the company that led to my job being eliminated. I enjoyed my work there. I enjoyed my team, et cetera. Expand upon it. Keep it very positive. You know, talking poorly about your last employer is typically not going to be a great way to get the next job anywhere. Even when they ask you what you liked least about your last job, focus on the tasks, not the people, not the politics. Focus on what was the type of work that was not as exciting for you, and then shift it to what you really enjoy and love doing. And even better yet, if that matches what's in the job requirements, you're golden. Situational or behavioral interviewing questions are also quite common now. It used to be that these scared people off. I think most people now have read online how to master situational or behavioral interview questions. The classic lead-in is, tell me a time when you had to manage an underperforming employee, or you struggled with a project and where it was headed and it was overdue. Whatever the story is that's appropriate for the job you're interviewing for, practice those in advance. Know what stories you'd like to highlight and tell out of your resume, because the stories you choose and how you tell them really reflect a lot about your attitude, about how you take personal accountability, about how you drive for progress and results and improvement, that you're not a victim, that you're willing to work hard. So these are great things to practice when you're practicing your interviews with other people, is telling your stories and let them tell you, here's what I took from that story. Here's what I heard and what I learned. You can chunk it up into, well, the situation was this. I had this basic problem. These are the actions that I took to address that problem. Some worked, some didn't. Here's what I learned. And ultimately, here's what was achieved with that outcome. That's a great way to organize your thoughts for answering these storyline questions. There's also a common category for a critical incident or challenge. How would you handle a situation in which? And it's important for you to try to listen to the question and see if you can assess, what are they really asking for here? Are they trying to assess ethics or my problem-solving capability, or how well I collaborate with other people, or you know, my bias for action, that I don't just sit back and wait, how I think, how I dissect problems. If you can listen for what they're looking for, and maybe even ask a clarification question, then you can organize your response. And again, I like to think of these three-part sort of organizing principles. Think of this as a mini speech. What's the idea overview that you want to tell them about how you would handle that situation? Then talk a little more specifically about some of the steps you would take, the sort of body of your approach, and then conclude and recap. So what I've basically said is, these are some key things I would look at in this, this type of challenge. And what you're doing throughout that is you're showing that you're being proactive. 3 more common types, and then I can't wait to hear the thoughts that you folks have. Illegal questions. People ask them sometimes. People ask them when they know they shouldn't sometimes, and people ask them because they don't realize that they shouldn't, and they haven't been trained very well in what they're allowed to ask in an interview. Some examples. How would you handle managing a team of all men might be presented to a female leader. How will you manage unexpected childcare issues? Men and women get those kinds of questions. How much do you make today? That is increasingly a question that is not allowed in most states across the country. Remember, all questions have to pertain to real job qualifications and occupational relevance. So if you get one of those questions that you think is a clear no-no or is skating the line, step back and try to think about, what are they really trying to ask me with this question? Is there a way that I can answer this? And, how much do I want this job? Because if I really want it, I'm going to do my best to answer it without having to give away too much or cross the line into responding to what is otherwise an illegal question. And how might my answer impact that outcome? So when you think about those things, then you can sort of respond and redirect. So for that question, how would you handle managing a team of all men? Just leave the of all men out of it and think, okay, they want to know how I would manage a team. Let me talk a little bit about how I would manage a team, and maybe redirect that and talk about some of the diverse teams that I've managed in the past and what I learned and what I felt worked really well. Childcare issues, just how about unexpected issues? Things that come up that nobody planned for. How will you handle them? Shift to that and then redirect that question. There's a lot of challenging questions. I only listed a couple of here, but there are many questions that make people nervous. Oh my gosh, what if they ask me this? Practice your answers to those. Go in prepared. They may not come up at all, but if they do, you'll have that content, you'll have that confidence. If you were fired in the past, to show how you've grown. If you're willing to move into a lower level job, why that makes sense to you in your career right now and why it actually is exciting to you. Also, hopefully most interviews end with, do you have any questions for us? Always, always have questions. I can't tell you how many times I've interviewed people who said, no, I don't think I have any. You've really kind of answered all my questions already. That again suggests a lack of interest, suggests a lack of curiosity, suggests somebody that didn't want to think that hard about the interview. So I would encourage you, come up with some questions when you're doing your research, back when you said, what is this company about and what would I like to learn more? And bring those into the meeting. There may be things that came up in the interview that you want to explore more. I would avoid questions like, how much time off can I get and how much vacation is there? Those things can come later when there's an offer on the table. Focus on questions about the organization and the business that would help you be successful by learning those answers. So I've talked a whole lot. I hope this has been some useful content with some practical takeaways. I'd love to hear your reactions and questions and other discussion points that you all would like to raise.
If you guys have any questions, you can raise your hand or unmute yourself and just go ahead and ask them. Patrick?
Yeah, I'm always going to have questions. Stacie, thank you for jumping on so early and providing all that content. I would love, this is an idea for TAG, I'd love to see you do kind of the flip side of that for small to medium businesses. How do you prepare an interview process? How do you create one? Because I know a lot of smaller companies struggle with that. One of the things you brought up was the idea of behavioral questions. It's something I think is being used a lot more. When I was running market force sales, one of the questions we used to ask people was about talent deficiencies. I think it's another way of asking about, what are your weaknesses? But we were trying to probe to find out is, okay, nobody's perfect. If you come on board, what is the one thing that I'm going to have to accommodate? Maybe your writing, it may be your communication skills. There's always going to be, everybody has some deficiency. How do you prepare for behavioral questions? How do you really start researching those? What are the type of questions? Because they can really be off the wall sometimes.
Yeah, they can be. So you blended a couple things there, the weakness question and the behavioral interview questions, and sometimes they do come together. You made me think of, though, an example that I want to share. A young woman who was an up-and-comer in sales, technical sales, and she was just doing great, went in for the next interview with the next company as her career was growing. And the interviewer said, so tell me what your greatest weakness is. And she stopped and she said, you know, I'm chronically tardy. and it was just blatantly honest. She laughed about it. She said, here's the way it's been a problem for me. Here's what I've done to fix it. I'm still not perfect, but and she went on to tell her story, and of course her achievements were many and very evident, and it brought humanity and a laugh into the interview. Now of course she probably judged that using her sales skills, that you know, this can sort of be a way to laugh and connect with this interviewer, and it went extremely well. So I do think that there are some typical ones. You can get online and research common behavioral interview questions. You know, tell me a time when you disagreed with a decision that was being made. Tell me a time when you had to manage an underperforming employee. Tell me a time when, you know, it goes down the line. If you'll go online and look for those, then you can say, okay, these are some that are likely to come up based on the job I'm applying for. These kinds of questions could be asked. When I think about my resume and skills that I want to highlight, what stories do I have that I could tell for those questions? And practice those in advance. Know the key points that you want to make relative to that job. If you get surprised by one in the interview, just step back, give yourself a moment to think about, what is this person asking, and what in my background do I want to highlight with my answer? And then follow that problem, action, results formula to structure your answer.
Well, thanks.
Any other questions for Stacie?
I have a question. This is Ray. I'm curious if you could offer some additional thoughts about work samples. And part of the reason why I ask is because my sense it is becoming more important over time to provide work samples just based on a lot of factors, and maybe even more so with more virtual work. I think that most of what I've produced, if not all, is company property over the course of my career. My roles have been product management related, so they tend to be company initiative or company product specific. So I'm not sure what the line is between work samples and things that shouldn't be shared because they really reflect more deeply on the company than me as an individual in some ways.
Yeah, Ray, that's a great question, and you are touching on a very delicate topic that is important to evaluate. You cannot share confidential, proprietary work from your current or former employers. And if you think there's something from a former employer that you could share, you should get clearance from them first before you do. Many times people will take some of that content and they'll black out anything that is too revealing, identifies the company or whatever. But when your work is typically more proprietary, I think it's helpful to kind of step back and say, what are the types of work that I have done? For example, when I create a monthly report on the performance of the product that I manage, what do I typically include in that report? How do I structure that report? And then put together even just a document that says, here's what I think about when I think about product performance and how I report the status of my product performance. And that can be something that you link to or that you share on a screen during an interview process. And it's really nothing more than an outline, but it illustrates how thorough you are, how detailed you are. Some of the other things that, you know, especially with software developers and all the open source, a lot of times there's a lot of good code you've written and technical work that you've done that's out there and available for people to find. If you're going after one of those really specific technical roles and you've got a strong technical recruiter working with you, show them that, point them to that. It tells them a lot about your capabilities and how that aligns with what they're looking for. other people who do design work, advertising work, I mean, they're able to oftentimes ask their clients or former customers, can I share this body of work as a reference of what I do? Again, get permission for that. But your point is a good one. When you can't, then step back and say, how would I explain to someone and illustrate as much as I can how I do this type of work so that they can see my thought process in my organization?
Thank you.
We have another question from Kristen. Do you have any advice from someone switching fields? How do you best represent skills that may transfer on the resume interview or in the interview?
It's a smart question to begin with, because the focus is on what are the transferable skills. Many times people are making a lateral cross-functional career move, maybe moving to a completely different industry as well. And they forget to stop and think about why they should be considered. What have they done in the past that is applicable in this organization, and why do they believe that will be valuable to the organization? So really, first of all, it's identifying what are those transferable skills. And then in that interviewing process, making the connection. You've studied that position, you've studied that company, making the connection between, I've done this type of work in the past, and I believe it would be very relevant to this challenge that your company is facing and what you're looking for in this role. And I think in some ways, my experience outside of this industry brings these kinds of new innovative insights and approaches that would not necessarily be readily available to people who've done this job forever. Then you've got to shift to the energy and the enthusiasm. Most people want to hire, a lot of times we say we want someone who's been there and done that. We most often really want someone who has the energy and excitement to jump in and give 150% to the job, because they're getting to do something that they never got to do before, and they're building a skill and they're building their career. So emphasize that in your response as well.
I think we have one more time for one more question. Anybody have the last question? Oh, here we go. Can you elaborate a bit more on body language, which is a great question, especially for Zoom interviews and stuff.
Yeah, exactly. It is. So I talked about look at the screen that has the camera. Think about your posture. Many times people will say, when you're doing an interview, sit on a hard chair, sit on the edge of a hard chair, put a smiley face on the side of your computer so that you remember to speak with enthusiasm and a friendly tone of voice, and that you smile during your interview. These are the kinds of things that portray your communication skills, your collaboration skills that will be important in any job, even if it's a 100% remote job. You are likely going to be interacting with clients or other team members, and you're demonstrating how you will do that through the interview process. I think the best way to know what you need to work on is to practice. If you practice interviews with other people, especially video interviews, and you tell them ahead of time, I want all the takeaways, all the impressions that you got, including how I look, how I act, how I sit, how I talk. You'll get that feedback, and you'll be able to make those adjustments. Hopefully that's helpful.
Yeah, Larry, you want to wrap it up?
We'll wrap it up. Thanks everybody for joining us. Stacie, thank you so much. This was very important and great perspectives for everyone. You always add so much. So thank you for taking time this morning and spending it with the tag. That's to all of you. Thank you for your membership. Thank you for your support. And we look forward to seeing you at the next one, and scheduled for Tuesday, June 23rd. And I believe we're going to have John Trainer, former CIO at Aaron's, and talk about rebranding yourself.
That'll be awesome. Thanks, Larry. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everybody. Have a great day.
Bye.
Bye.